Yo, so guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to American cities versus European cities. What's the difference? And I mean, yeah, this video was just getting suggested to me over the last few days, and I eventually decided I do want to react to it. I didn't really know if they'd be interested in it or not, but I was interested in doing it myself, so I just thought, fuck it, and now we're here. But it's a small channel, so if you can show them some love and say I sent you or whatever, I'd appreciate it. And I mean, subscribe. Let's get them to 6.1k subscribers. So let's get him 60 subscribers, maybe more. We'll see. But yeah, check this video out. I mean, I don't really know what else to say really. I know the difference. One huge difference is skyscrapers. Now, in terms of skyscrapers, American cities are just they go nuts. European cities are sort of known to not have necessarily as many skyscrapers. London's probably an exception, and maybe like I don't know Paris. But does Paris have skyscrapers? I don't know. London? Well, maybe London is really the only city because there's a lot of sort of more historical cities or like older buildings in a lot of the other European cities like Paris, Milan, and just so on. So fucking German capital, Berlin, and yeah, just throughout most of the European cities basically. But maybe we're going to see some other differences. Maybe the way they're sort of laid out. I know a lot of American cities they're obviously laid out a lot more sort of. I think it's like sort of very not square, but like what was the word? Like quite wide. Maybe because not maybe. I keep saying maybe. Why do I say maybe a lot? Because obviously US cities and the US as a whole is so much bigger. Cities can just be more spread out, so there's a lot more space between certain things, etc. But I mean, I'm just gonna get into this. I'm rambling at this point. Quick shout out to my Instagram. Quick shout out to my Twitter. Links in the description for those interested. Closing in 7k on my Instagram, so I'd appreciate you helping get to that. Save my Patreon links were there for those interested. Let's just shake this out and breathe.
The United States and Europe both have large urban populations and deep cultural ties, but their respective cities have some distinct differences. For starters, there is a significant age gap between European and American cities.
I would say European cities are probably older, right?
When Europeans
I thought you meant the age of the people, not the actual age of the cities. My bad.
first arrived in the Americas in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, there were as many as 10 million natives living in what is today the United States. But the natives were not concentrated in large urban settlements like the civilizations in what is today Mexico and Central and South America. If there had been, you can only speculate on what would have happened to them. There are some exceptions though. The oldest continuous settlements in the United States belong to natives and are located in the southwest United States. These settlements were founded around 1100
Oh
AD.
shit! Look at this place.
But they generally have never hosted more than a few thousand people. The largest known native settlement in the United States hosted as many as 18,000 natives. This city, called Cahokia, was located in what is today the state of Illinois, and just minutes from the modern-day city of St. Louis. But Cahokia was abandoned by the year 1350. The 10 largest cities in the United States, on average, were settled around the early to mid-18th century, while Europe's 10 largest cities are hundreds and sometimes thousands of years older. Europe's 10 largest cities by population are on average larger than American cities when counting the residents within city limits.
That's
Out of Europe's 10 largest cities by population, none have less than 2 million people. But in the United States, 6 of its top 10 have less than 2 million people. European cities also have a higher population density. Out of Europe's 10 most
Actually, it isn't a surprise. It isn't a surprise when you think about it, because Europe is the similar size to the US, but the population is like 3 times more. So that isn't a surprise. Why would it be a surprise?
populated cities, only 3 have a density of less than 10,000 people per square mile: St. Petersburg, Russia, Kiev, Ukraine, and Rome, Italy. The city with the highest density is Paris, with 53,000 people per square mile, nearly twice as many people as the United States' densest city, New York, with 28,000 people per square mile.
Paris, man, what the
After
fuck?
New York City, it drops off pretty quickly. The second most populated city in the U.S., Los Angeles, has 8,500 people per square mile. Chicago, 12,000 people per square mile. Houston, 3,500 people per square mile. And Phoenix, 3,100 people per square mile. The differences in European and U.S. cities' populations and densities are largely due to American suburbs. People are living outside of city limits and in homes instead of.
Yeah, and like I said, it's kind of like a lot more space, etc. A lot more spread out. So like you have bigger gardens, you have more spaces between the roads and stuff. which is definitely better. I'm not gonna lie. In general, that would be the dream for everyone. It's just obviously not possible in European cities like it is in the US.
of multi-story structures. These suburbs initially came about because of the train. They then exploded with the wider use of the car and cheap fuel that powered them. Land outside of American cities was also cheap, making homes affordable for the middle class. Chicago is often credited with inventing the suburb. After the fire of
Oh wow.
1874, the city banned the construction of wood buildings. So speculators built cheap wooden homes as fast as they could just outside of Chicago for the 100,000 people that were just left homeless. After World War II, the federal government started guaranteeing loans that required 20% or less for a down payment and loan lengths as long as 30 years. Before this, it was common to have to make a 50% down payment with loan lengths as short as 5 to 10 years.
Fuck.
These
Me.
new loans increased the amount of people that could purchase a home. But these loans had more favorable terms for new construction compared to existing housing since the government did not want to back a loan on a house.
Like, just look at it. It's just like so sort of like neat in a sense. Like, it's just sort of like you would not get this in European cities. It's like squiggly lines all over. Like, again, there are squiggly lines here, but like it's sort of perfect squiggly lines, symmetrical. UK, bro, you've got some like weird one going up a map, like going up like a hill. It's just one's going through it. You got a dead end here. You got a dead end there. It's just so different. It is funny to see, man, because it's just you wouldn't see this in England. I mean, you probably would in certain places that are built a lot more recently, but in the older sort of places where I used to live and where I live now, there's just roads going in every direction.
House that may have issues. This meant it was easier to get a new home in the suburbs than a property close to the city center, which was typically older. However, African Americans were often discriminated against when it came to these loans, so few were able to move to the suburbs. While mortgage
Oh, wow.
discrimination has improved significantly, the discrimination that occurred from the 40s to the 60s contributed to generational poverty, and it has had a lasting impact on the geography of American cities. African Americans are still less likely to be living in the suburbs than whites, though the demographics are slowly changing. Today, more African Americans actually live in the suburbs at 39% than within city limits at 36%. The mass exodus in many of these cities, often referred to as white flight, led to severe urban decay. Residential buildings were abandoned, leading to local businesses shutting their doors due to less customers, which resulted in job losses, which led to poverty and crime, which led to more people leaving. This cycle continues in many cities today, while others have seen an urban revival in the last couple of decades, as many young professionals move back to the city. However, where wealthier people in the United States tend to live in the suburbs, in Europe, wealthier individuals are more likely to live in the city center. Take a look at this map of the London Underground, which
That is crazy how it just completely switches round. That is wild when you think about it. Like in London, there's this place called like Chelsea, and that's like the place to live if you've got money in London, man. Like everything there is just nice. You're surrounded by like lovely restaurants and just clubs or nightlife or whatever, anything you want basically. And in London, in the US, it sort of switches around. The more expensive places, the richer people, maybe not more expensive, but the richer people will live in the. That's wild, actually. That's blown my mind when I think about
shows
it.
the average income of the neighborhoods that use each stop. The highest incomes are at the center of the city, and the lowest incomes are at the farthest.
Fuck me. That's blown my mind. I never realised it like that. What the hell? So the closer you live to the city centre in London, the more money you're likely to earn. And it's the opposite. I could be the opposite. Maybe not the opposite, but definitely very different in New York and maybe a lot of other US cities, if not all US
Other
cities.
stops from the center. Speaking of public transportation, Europe's public transportation systems are usually thought of as superior to the United States, with a few exceptions like New York City. Because of the suburbs, U.S. cities are too spread out, and buses and trains can't stop at every block to pick everyone up. If they did, it would run extremely slow. When it comes to roads, both the United States and Europe have extensive major road networks. But in the United States, large roads often run right through its cities.
Bro, you don't see roads like this in where I'm from for sure, but like even in London, I mean, you definitely do find roads like this, but not to this degree, I don't think. Like, just going all over everything, man.
Instead of up to it. While this may make sense in trying to quickly travel from state to state or city to city, it is often criticized for splitting neighborhoods and disrupting local communities. Another thing that separates European and U.S. cities are the amount of skyscrapers.
Skyscrapers, yep.
United States cities generally have more skyscrapers. Out of 50 cities in the world with the most skyscrapers, only 2 are in Europe. Moscow, Russia, with 57 skyscrapers, and Frankfurt, Germany, tied for 50th
Wait, so London's not even here?
with 17. The United States has 11 cities in the top 50.
Fucking hell. And skyscrapers are beautiful, man. You can't beat a skyscraper, I'm not going to lie. It just makes the skyline look so much nicer.
With the most going to New York City with 287 skyscrapers.
Wow.
When European
I fucking hear like beeping outside. What the fuck?
cities do have skyscrapers, they tend to have a section designated for them, away from
Yeah.
their historic city center, like La Défense, a business district which is actually a few miles outside of Paris itself. The skyscraper was first born in the United States in the late 19th century, the first in Chicago and later in New York City.
Is this picture real? Oh, well, these guys built different, bro.
The United States took pride in their large structures, seeing them as a symbol of their prosperity and power. Europe, on the other hand, already had established historic buildings and public spaces that left little room for large new structures. They were also resistant to what could be considered American. After the destruction of European cities in the Second World War, Europe had the chance to build whatever they wanted. They could redesign their cities around the car as American cities were starting to, and now had room to build skyscrapers. But Europe chose not to. Europe had an overwhelming desire to build their cities back to the way they were before the war and to preserve their unique cultures and way of life.
Oh, wow.
The city of Brussels also played a role in the rest of Europe protecting its urban landscape. The city of Brussels had a laissez-faire approach to urban planning in the 1960s to the 1980s. Structures that were often generic and didn't fit in with Brussels' historic city landscape were put all over the city. The rest of Europe took notice and became concerned a similar randomness of structures could be placed all over their respective cities. Zoning laws that protected Europe's historic districts and structures were then passed across the continent. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for
Good
other
video,
geography-related topics.
I've really
Thank
enjoyed
you
this,
for-
you know. You know what? Fuck it, let's give them a subscription. This was a banging video, man. Geography Geek, shout out to you. If you're interested in this channel, links are in the description to him, man. Show him some love, because this was an interesting one for sure. And I mean, let me know your thoughts on this. Again, I love historical. You can't beat a historical building, but at the same time, I love skyscrapers. A mixture of the two would be cool, but I guess, like you said, in certain cities, like in Paris, and I think in London, sort of similar as well. I forget what the area is called, but like there's a lot of historical sort of videos, buildings, and then there's like a group of the sort of skyscrapers all together, and then it just sort of goes back to sort of the sort of smaller historical why do you say videos? Buildings. But I mean, when I go to London, I look up at like the skyline, and I'm just like blown away. I'm literally like in awe of just how big the buildings are. So when I go to somewhere like New York one day, whenever it happens, my mind is going to be blown, man, because there's just going to be skyscrapers everywhere. Especially if I go to like the centre just to explore and see what it looks like. It's going to blow my mind, man. It really is, but be an experience for sure, man. Correction, London is ranked 40th with 30 skyscrapers. That makes 3 European cities. I was wondering where London was. I was kind of shook by the hell. I thought London was like the big don of Europe, but maybe not. The reason rich people live in European city centres is because the city centres are beautiful and old, and outside it's post-war speed building, very simple and or ugly architecture. I get very angry when people try to build these kind of monstrosities in our city centres. A true crime. Europe is on another level when it comes to beauty and history. US cities are more parking lots and highways than anything else built for cars. America, build big. Europe, build big. But people are so toxic in videos, man. I think there's beautiful cities all around the world, man. Just because some people like sort of define beauty by like how old it is or like the history behind it. Nah, man, you can have beauty in many ways, and there are history behind many buildings anyway. Like But do I watch this one as well? I love this channel. You know what? I might just watch this one as well. I might just add a bit more to the video. If you're still watching, thank you, because this video is a bit of a mess. But why Europe doesn't build skyscrapers? Let's check this out. Fuck it, let's see this one as well. Ah, that was loud.
Why aren't there many skyscrapers in Europe? Despite being one of the most developed...
Like, he described it and he sort of, the other guys explained it, but I just know the B1M. I like his channel a lot, so it's just gonna... This is for me. And if you want to watch this reaction along with me, you do you.
densely populated and economically prosperous continents, Europe has surprisingly few skyscrapers, particularly when compared to Asia and North America. Of the 218 skyscrapers constructed on the continent to date, 66% of them are located in just 5 cities: London, Paris, Frankfurt, Moscow, and Istanbul.
Let me just go back, so I'm just muddling.
Constructed on the continent to date, 66% of them are located in just 5 cities:
That's kind
London,
of crazy.
Paris, Frankfurt, Moscow, and Istanbul.
Frankfurt looks beautiful,
So
by the way.
why have other major European cities not embraced the skyscraper? How do they thrive without the significant inner urban space and floor areas that these clever structures provide? And is everything about to change in our increasingly urbanized world? When skyscrapers first rose to prominence in the 19th century, first in Chicago and later in New York, many European cities were already firmly established, with grand historic buildings and public spaces that left little room for large new structures. Most of Europe's cities around that time were also more evenly zoned, and were not facing the high demand for floor space in key districts that typically drives high-rise development. Additionally, as the power and influence of North America began to grow, a cultural rivalry emerged between Americans who saw Europe's class system as outdated, and Europeans who saw some American ideals as eroding traditions and the European way of life. As a result, each continent became wary of adopting the other's concepts. While North America aims to become the model for a new age, Europe sought to preserve its heritage.
See, I find it so interesting because then you sort of see like the UK or England in particular, maybe just the whole UK. Like there's Europe and then there's the UK who has a lot of European traditions, but then also sort of took a lot of the US traditions or like ways of life or doing certain things like the buildings, etc. Like I feel like London looks a lot more like places like Boston and even somewhat like New York in a sense, maybe nowhere near, or maybe I'm completely wrong with that, than a lot of European cities do. But I mean, maybe I'm just sort of taking it, I don't actually fully understand it, because maybe Paris or France do actually have a lot more sort of similarities with the US than the UK. Maybe it's just the language that I'm thinking that, but I don't know, I just feel like England or the UK as a whole took a lot more of like sort of both sides and sort of put it together. I don't know, I could be completely off of that.
While this explains why skyscraper construction didn't initially catch on in Europe, it doesn't explain what has held the continent back since.
Post-war rebuild. So he explained this in the last one as well, yeah?
In the wake of the Second World War, many thought European cities would modernise and replicate the skyscrapers that were rising across North America. However, in Western Europe, where many cities lost landmark and historic structures, an overwhelming desire to restore what had been destroyed took hold. In addition, the lower population of Europe at that time meant that the demand for floor area that principally drives skyscraper construction wasn't there. As a result, modest structures replaced buildings that could not be saved or restored. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, the expanding Soviet Union's rebuild efforts consisted largely of mid-rise repetitive structures that sought to rehouse much of the population. It was during this time that Europe saw its first skyscrapers begin to...
This building looks crazy, man. Fuck. I know Moscow's got some beautiful buildings, but this one looks incredible.
rise, not in response to growth and prosperity, but in an effort by the Soviets to indicate their power and influence.
Brusselsization.
While Brussels has never constructed a true skyscraper, It is
Oh,
partly
right.
responsible for the lack of skyscrapers across the continent. Without any significant zoning regulations in place, the 1960s saw many buildings in the city demolished to make way for large, modern structures that had little regard for architectural or cultural value. Recognising the damage this indiscriminate redevelopment was doing to the city, many prominent figures and architects coined the term Brusselisation and lobbied to introduce new planning laws. These regulations significantly limited the scale of new buildings and required historic facades to be restored and incorporated into new developments, preserving the cultural fabric of the city. The row in Brussels led to a general dislike for modern buildings across Europe, with many seeing them as bland or soulless. In response, numerous cities adopted similar regulations and set aside controlled districts, like Paris's La Défense, to keep high-rise development away from historic centres.
But I do think that's quite a smart thing to do, sort of having your area like where all like the skyscrapers are, and then sort of the rest of it sort of similar, like the same. I do think that's quite a smart thing, and it looks nice as well. I think it looks quite cool, and it's just a group of like skyscrapers all bunched together. Fuck is that building?
By the start of the 21st century, attitudes around tall buildings were softening across the continent, as architectural trends moved away from box-like structures towards more unique designs, and as the world became increasingly globalised.
What the fuck? Never seen these buildings before.
Since the early 2000s, major financial centres like London, Paris, Moscow, Istanbul and Frankfurt have seen several skyscrapers rise, as demand for commercial space in their centres has increased. By contrast, smaller European cities that have been experiencing more modest growth have turned their focus to the environment and improving
Bro, those buildings are nice, man. They are beautiful. I'd love to live somewhere like
living
this for sure.
standards for citizens. In recent years, urban areas in Scandinavia and Central Europe have consistently ranked among the highest in the world for sustainability, happiness and well-being, while maintaining importance within their national economies. However, skyscraper construction in the cities of today is no longer driven purely by economic
Lisbon,
growth
right.
or the need for commercial office space. With 60% of the global human population set to be living in urban areas by 2030, residential skyscrapers are now rising in prominence, particularly across Asia and North America. As many traditional rural-based industries become automated, millions are migrating into cities and major urban areas, driving significant demand for residential space that is often met with high-rise structures. Europe is not immune to this phenomenon, particularly in such a heavily globalised world, and with the continent's desire to keep up with the progress and economic growth of China and the US. As such, Europe could witness a skyscraper boom in the decades ahead.
Okay.
However, with entire urban centres now being declared historically significant, and with the desire to retain as much culture and architecture as possible rightly holding strong up to the present day, the unique challenge facing future skyscraper construction
This building's crazy. I remember when I went to Barcelona, this building is nuts.
in Europe is all to do with the past. If you enjoyed this video and would like to get more from the Definitive video channel for
I love these videos so much, man. I find them so fun to see. Short answer, Europe likes to preserve its historic architecture. In short, America had basically no historically or culturally relevant architecture tradition, so they could build whatever they wanted without spoiling the cityscape. I'm French, I can't imagine Paris, Marseille, Lyon, Montpellier with skyscrapers, just no. I mean, I guess it's just down to preference, honestly. I like them, and I like them without. I just think it's cool. I think it's cool to mix them all together, but I mean, that's just me, but I enjoy these videos, I'm not gonna lie. I find this stuff really fun to see. Architecture and sort of looking at cities, I just find it so satisfying seeing how such like, I don't know, famous cities or big cities all look so different. I just love it, man. If it all looked the same, it would be awful. If all the US cities look like European cities and all the European cities look like US cities, and like Asian cities all look like US cities and European cities, it wouldn't be fun, man. It's nice how they just all look different, and it's just fun to see like how certain places are evolving into like sort of more modern sort of looking buildings. Some are sort of staying like sticking to the sort of historic. I don't know what I'm looking like the sort of historical look on their older buildings, like keeping the history. It's just fun seeing all the differences, man. But yeah, hopefully you enjoy this one. More reactions like this on the way. But I mean, yeah, next time, like, subscribe.